And welcome back. I'm
never
Aaron
know who to
Steele.
talk. And I'm Brian. I'm still Brian. My hair's done, so we're good to go.
Okay, good.
Awesome.
So Brian, we're going to talk now about deploying and designing external access.
The Edge.
Edge.
Part of the most fascinating, awesomeness, totally cool feature set of Lync. I mean, it is what enables Lync to be Lync.
Oh, completely agreed. And it's unique amongst SIP and SIP products out there.
That's right. It's something that allows on-parity communications inside and outside, fully secured. So.
Yeah. So when we're talking about Edge or talking about external, really it's sort of three facets. It's making sure your conferencing and external capabilities are there and what you need to do in 2013 to get those. You really want to think about planning for IM and presence federation. And then you want to really talk about what it takes to design an Edge server. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about the conferencing capabilities in Lync server, in Lync server 2013. Just a quick overview of what's enabled with PIC and public instant messaging. Talking about that, what we can do about XMPP, how XMPP federation works, what we can control through the federation policies, and how we get security in those external scenarios. So conferencing capabilities, we covered this a lot in the prior talk about conferencing, but when we're talking about conferencing, we really have these sort of 7 conferencing, what we sometimes term modalities. We've got video conferencing, we've got audio, web, instant messaging, but then PSTN we do actually have to think of as an external and unique conference modality. ACP integration, again, that's online only for that. And then last, but certainly not least, is the integration with third-party AV MCUs. And SIP endpoints. So those Polycom conference room systems that that exist, as well as the new Lync room systems, integrating with those and bringing those into the fold so that we can have good and real interactions between those things in the environment. So, public instant messaging.
PIC.
Right. So it's about letting your on-premise users or your company-hosted Lync users communicate with instant messages, as well as in some cases audio, and in some cases video is pending to those public internet providers. And as we spoke of earlier, one of those providers that got recently lit up was Skype. The requirement there really is that your Microsoft account, what used to be known as your Live ID, is what's used to sign into the Skype account.
Right, because they're hairpinning through MSA.
Right, they're leveraging the messaging, the Windows, the old Microsoft Messenger servers for the transit to the Skype client.
Right, and when we talk about public IMs, Skype is new to the actual namespace, but PIC itself, this is 2005 Service Pack 1. This is nothing new. Technology hasn't changed, the way it's presented hasn't changed, the configuration hasn't changed. Nothing to be concerned or scared about here. It's the same thing we've had for a very, very long time.
Yeah, most definitely. One of the new, so some of the additional features that came about in 2010 that are still there in 2013 is the ability for you to block file transfers across your edge, so you can make sure that people aren't file transferring to federated parties. Because even though we're talking PIC here, it is technically a federation.
Yeah, it's an enhanced federation client. But you're right, it's exactly that. It is a federation. It's just a controlled federation.
And it is important to remember that similar to company-to-company federations, the IM channel and the audio and video channel may be very different in this communication, especially for the integration to Skype and to Messenger, where we get those audio channels. We prefer definitely to send client-to-client, P2P audio and video.
Always, whenever possible.
Yeah, most definitely. Again, through the PIC service, if you've ever gone through this to get PIC provisioned. There's a whole process to get yourself PIC provisioned through the Microsoft licensing engine.
Yeah, it's so much fun, and it still takes up to 30 days. So plan accordingly. And in fact, I think in part of the planning docs and guides, it says, if you're going to be doing this, start there. Start on that website. Get your Edge server name in, whether it's up or not yet. Ideally, it's up. But get that up and in.
They won't turn it on if it's not up.
They won't turn it on by the time they get to it. It has to be up. Right? But you can start this process and expect at least 15 days before anything's even looked at. And part of their process is they validate that they can get to the Edge server you say is your Edge server.
And the certs are there.
And everything can function as expected.
Yep.
Assuming that it's all good to go at that point, in reality, you're good to go forever, even if things change. But start the process early because it does take time.
Most definitely. Good to remember. So XMPP. XMPP was a new capability that we had in OCS 2007 R2, and there was this XMPP gateway that we had that was really just this other piece of little code that went out there like an Edge server that you configured, and it let users federate with Google Talk.
Now, XMPP, that's SIP, but in a different vendor's language type?
Effectively, yeah. Effectively, it's a different vendor's version of what we call the Signal Initiation Protocol. They call the Extensible Messaging and Presence Protocol.
Right. Yeah, and there are multiple vendors out there that use it. It's not a Gmail only thing. And there's Jabra.
There's Jabber clients.
And there's different, potentially a lot of things. And I've worked with some public sector that use it as a back-end communication type. So it's not something that you won't run into at some point, I guess is the point. It's something that could still be something you need to use. The difference being now, we don't have to deploy a whole new architecture to use it. It's just part of your Edge servers and your front-end servers.
It is important to note that that Google has announced that they are de-emphasizing their use of XMPP in their protocol stack. Right. And they're working to move users who are currently chatting over XMPP into their even more proprietary protocol of Hangouts.
So there's a high likelihood in the very near future that the Gmail Google Talk communication will no longer work with XMPP.
Yep.
So,
just a thing to know.
But it is important to know that's not something that Microsoft did or didn't do. They support the open XMPP standard. It's a change on another third party's part. So.
Yep. So from an XMPP federation, it's important to recognize that this runs across the Edge role. It's set up and monitored, and there's not really anything configured about this, except you are adding parties who are using XMPP into your federated parties list in your topology. Again, it's natively integrated into the front end and Edge. The thing that is very important to remember about, even though it is integrated on the front end, that doesn't mean you can use an XMPP client to sign into your Lync server.
At all. Right? It's just there as the relay of things that are happening, but it's really, Lync's Lync, and Lync clients and SIP clients are what's required. XMPP is a protocol we're able to understand. That's basically
through an additional gateway service.
Right.
Again, the target for this was really scale out high availability to provide that on par with the rest of the Lync service.
In my opinion, give you something, since again the old code that we used in Lync 2010 was actually OCS 2007 R2's code. It never changed.
No, it never changed, and it was a single server providing that single role with no high availability, no real disaster recovery. Your disaster recovery was stand up a new one.
Yeah. Quickly.
Yes. We call that a warm standby, I think. So the architecture of this doesn't really change. Your XMPP federation route is the same as your PIC federation route, and the same as your federated partner route, and the same as, in fact, your route if you are connecting with a hybrid domain, a split SIP domain into O365. They all transit that same channel of the Lync Edge server. That Edge server talks to the front-end pool, which may talk to you know, your Exchange server. It may talk to your IM and Presence client. It may talk to other persistent chat pools. This shouldn't be thought of, though, that this means that a Google Talk user can participate in a persistent chat room.
At all. But there is also important to know that because we do have different ports, different protocols, there are additional ports that have to be open on the firewall to communicate to the edge, app out and in, but nothing overly exotic. So
it should be noted, though, that the Yahoo Federation is in fact gone and completely disabled by Yahoo at this time. We need to get that icon off of this slide.
Well,
So when we're talking about this from an external policy perspective, we get this set of external access policies, but it kind of is an all or nothing, right? I can define unique users should have unique settings in these policies, such that I could say Brian can't federate, Aaron can. But what I can't do natively within the product is Brian can federate, but not with Yahoo.
Right.
Aaron can federate and with Yahoo. We really need to add some additional third-party products to enable those features and functionalities.
The other, it may be less expensive, maybe more expensive, I guess depends on your rollout, option is to have a different edge server and a pool, because we can have different rights and roles per edge server, and then we can change things in that method for an egress perspective. More than likely, that's going to be cost prohibitive, but it is an option.
You'll see here, we have to turn on federation, that we have to enable that user for federated access before we turn on XMPP.
Because that is a part of federation. It's just another protocol.
It's just not SIP-based federation, it's XMPP-based. And then we can turn on, in fact, should they be able to communicate with your own company's users when they are remote, or in fact, should they be able to communicate with public users. In this case, it's a little weird in the case that XMPP, in this case, could be a public provider, but isn't managed in the public providers list.
Right.
In this same way.
When we think of public providers, we think of PIC. When we think of PIC, it's AOL, Yahoo, MSN/Skype.
Yep.
And Lync Online as well gets thrown into that bucket these days as well. But it, like you said, Google Mail, that's third party, or Gmail. You would assume, but it's not. It's not the way it's configured. It is an XMPP federation communication.
It shows up here in the XMPP federated partners list as part of a federated user communication rather than as part of the SIP federated providers list, which is the public users list.
Right.
So your SIP federated domains are your other companies you're federating with. Those are going in that federated users. Your SIP federated providers are going to be the public providers. Your XMPP users are going to be this XMPP list. So you can get very granular about turning on all these federations, but controlling which organizations you let your users communicate with.
Yeah. So to your point, the granularity comes from the modality of external communication more so than the subset.
Yes.
Because we do have clients that it's not uncommon that they'll say, I want this group of users to be able to talk to this federated client, but not this. Well, we don't have that. We don't have that capability natively without, again, a separate pool, separate edge, which I guess you could do, or a third-party tool.
Yeah. So when we talk about security and external access, it's about, you get into thinking about Lync in a different way, right? If security is your main focus, you very well likely will deploy directors, right? To give you that additional abstraction layer that they provide. You'll want to definitely look at this from a point of view of setting up your conferencing policies to only allow the supported usage scenarios. If you're that concerned about the security access, it's entirely possible that you won't want to turn on the setting that says PSTN users bypass the lobby, right? look at what you're going to need from an anti-malware solution. Are you going to need to put something on the edge servers that provides you an antivirus, anti-malware capability within the product?
Or are you comfortable with your desktop client being capable?
Yep,
Right.
yep,
Yeah.
most definitely. This says avoid. I would say prevent edge server deployment in the internal domain. That is, your edge servers are not supported to be in the same internal domain that your Lync servers are in.
Right. I mean,
They can be in a domain.
And I've seen people do member servers of the domain. It just breaks down the entire security model of
And
our
there's no need for it.
And yeah, there's no value in it other
Yep.
than I can remote manage it with. Well, you know what? There's
so little you need to do on an edge server in 2010 and
just
2013.
Sits there, right?
Yeah. All its configuration gets pushed out. What you have to interact with from an edge server today in Lync 2013 is renewing the certificate when it expires.
Yeah, rolling it over.
Right. That's it.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to interact with that server when you need to troubleshoot something. You get the firewall ports open. You can do CLS logging.
The argument comes patching and patch management. Mm-hmm. Granted, there is patching that must be done to keep them up to date. But so do all your other servers. And even if you were to roll out something like Configuration Manager to manage that, you can do Configuration Manager in DMZs as well. Mm-hmm. So that is possible to do without. The point being, don't put it in your domain. It's not recommended. It's not supported, and it breaks down all the security barriers that have been built on purpose. So.
Most definitely. Again, when you're deploying Edge, it's really highly recommended that Edge, in fact, has an internal firewall and an external firewall. Edge, in case you're not familiar with it, which is highly unlikely if you're coming from a Lync 2010 world, is a device that has two network interfaces and is something that sits out there as that layer. It's effectively a bridge between your external and your internal network.
And I'll also say there's different rumblings and postings and blogs are what they are, about using a single interface on an edge server. Again, you've defeated the purpose of having the termination, and it's not supported in any method or manner. But if you look at it from an appliance perspective, that's what we're building when we build an edge server. We are building a locked down version of Windows that's running a specific application that's receiving communication, terminating, and reestablishing communication to be secure in every method possible. Once you start monkeying with things that weren't designed to be monkeyed with, you've broken stuff.
Yeah.
And it may appear to work. Will it work under a load? Will it work in real production? Again, not supported, not tested, not by design.
And actually, probably in that case of a single NIC for an edge server, it was probably, in fact, tested and said it doesn't work.
Yeah, I don't disagree. So for all those, if you want to lab it, try to get it because that's all you've got, great. Never put anything to production.
Yeah.
And never put anything to POC. That's not what you would ever put into production. So
Yep.
follow the recommendations, follow the guidelines. It is a 2 network card box. I've also seen where people have broken it up into 3 externals and 1 internal. You will cause yourself headaches when you start breaking up the network traffic. There is reason to do so, but to do so, keep them all on separate subnets so we can route things appropriately. Otherwise, we have ingress, egress issues, and Windows does much better with it since R2, but 2008 R2. But I'm just, from experience, don't.
When you look at the Lync documentation on TechNet about deploying an edge, it has a fairly well described 1 NIC on the inside, 1 NIC or 3 NICs on the outside with multiple IP addresses, everything listening on 443, because otherwise you're going to run into problems with other people's firewalls trying to access your Lync servers. Look at those documents and really understand why and what's going on in them. There's this idea when you're talking about security for conferencing and external access, you may want to look at what it takes to lock down that edge server, locking it down from a network perspective, locking it down with IDSs, IPSs. The big caveat and the big thing I want to tell you there is if you're deploying an intrusion detection system on your Lync server, make sure it's in a monitor-only mode for a long time, because the type of communication that you're going to do in your Lync environment is going to be so different from anything that IDS has ever seen.
Yeah, and majority of them don't get it. So whether it's an appliance or whether it's a software-based one, We were just working again with a government contractor who swore it had to work. Eventually, the vendor had to come back and say, you just need to disable it for this application. We don't know. We can't get it to work right. Because it's not real HTTP traffic, and it's trying to inspect HTTPS. And yes, we're using 443 as a port, but most of that communication isn't HTTPS traffic. And it gets all confused.
It's over 443, but it's C3P and SIP and PSOM.
Exactly. And so just be aware that while we're using a port doesn't mean that we're using the traffic that's typically associated with that port.
Yeah, we're using that port generally so that other people can connect to it.
Right.
Again, if you are really that concerned with the security on your environment, go back to the business and say, do you need anonymous and or federated people's access into this environment?
And remote access. If not, shut it down.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, if the business driver is to have it, we were with a very large financial institution who the firewall team was dead set on a triple DMZ.
Yeah.
Lync doesn't fit into their triple DMZ configuration no matter what you do. We had,
at that point, a C-level gets to step in and say,
we are making an override because I want this functionality. And when that happens, it's done. Or it could have been, no, we're not going to override our policies. Then you're not getting the product. I mean, It's as simple as that. Lync's design is Lync's design, and you can try to fit it into your, square peg round hole concept.
Yeah.
It doesn't work unless it's done the way it's designed to work. So.
So there are some third-party products out there that can be licensed from a DDoS protection standpoint, because the one thing to remember, Lync natively in an edge role will accept credentials and attempt to authenticate them against the pool. If they DDoS you and try and authenticate with a client and can lock out all your users in your Lync world,
that's bad.
That's not a great thing. And there are some third-party products that are made and work very well to do soft lockouts on the edge role and prevent some of that access. If you need some links for that, just ask in the chat window, and I'm sure we can get you a link for it. Now we're moving on to IAM and Presence Federation. This is really talking about what it takes, and when you're designing for Federation and Lync, what you need to see and what pieces are in the mix when you're doing that federation. So this is a very simplified view of what Federation and Lync looks like. It's this, we've got something on the internet running some piece of code, be it a remote user, a federated user, or an anonymous user. They are transiting a firewall and very possibly a reverse proxy and our edge server, another firewall, very possibly a director, and then into the front ends. In that whole communication, all those people and all those paths have to be open in the right way, have to be understood, and have to pass traffic the way Lync expects it.
Right. Uninhibited, unmodified, encryption intact, all those things to make sure, and that's again where we have IDS and things messing with stuff. Don't be touching our packets. Let them through. So
there's one good thing to remember here when we're talking about SIP federation is we do have some granularity about the level of protection we get there. We can do what's called direct federation. We can do enhanced federation, and then finally we can open the gates wide for open federation.
I like open federation.
Open federation is great. It lets any user who has Lync simply click on you and start IMing.
This is where I come from my standpoint on open. In the olden days, and it's not that old, in the email days, we used to have to set up like AT&T gateways to get from company A to company B to get communication and email to flow. It was cumbersome. It was a pain. But that's how you did it.
You understood the other company's environment just to get email to them.
Then we got to the concept
DNS.
of opening stuff and DNS and MX records, and I could discover an environment just by doing a DNS query. What a great idea. Well, that same concept exists with the the
SIP
SIP Federation
and Open
TLS
Federation.
TCP record is equivalent to the concept of an MX record. Go query it, you can find it, and there's a port, and you can get to it, talk to it.
Yep.
To me, that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's where things will get eventually someday. The paranoia is around the malware and the spam and the things of that nature. But
And Lync has a fairly robust set of spam and malware things built into the Lync Edge server, right? Lync won't send a message that it finds is malformed.
you also find, just as an interesting side, that there are a lot, Microsoft's not one of them, ironically enough, but a lot of large, huge companies that have Open Federation enabled.
Oh, yeah.
And you'll find that because you'll be replying to an IM or an email and then decide to right-click on the person's name and you say, try IM, and pop, there's presence. You're like, excellent, this is awesome. So,
a good thing to note about, even if you've turned on Open Federation, it has effectively
a limiter
on it, right? If that Open Federation partner starts sending you more than a message per second, they will start getting throttled by the Edge server, and you may have to put them into some level of enhanced or domain or direct federation to bypass that throttling.
Yeah, and that's funny because that can be a real support issue where you just have open on, and then people are saying they're not getting the IM, and it could be because there's just too many people talking to too many people all at once from a particular partner, and it's a simple fix, just add them to the list and you're done.
Yep.
But anyway, so
anyhow,
moving along.
So. In our interoperability story, we've talked about this, but it really is, it's MSN and Skype these days, right? Because Yahoo's gone. You can still talk to AOL, right? For now.
For now.
It goes through a Microsoft licensed or a Microsoft process to get that PIC federation set up, where you tell it about your Lync environment and you tell it about that you want to be PIC licensed, because some of these providers actually charged a license fee to set up federation with them. So there was, $1 per user per year or whatever it was.
I think it was the standard, per company, it was not inexpensive. It was a great deal at the time when nothing existed in 2005 and you had one way to make one client.
Yep.
It was fancy. But it is interesting. And as we go through that list, that next is the XMPP with Google Talk, which is potentially going away shortly.
Yeah.
So now we have Skype.
Give your feedback to Google
Skype,
if you want them to keep that.
And Skype. I mean, that's what we've got left.
Yeah.
But I will say from a personal
Skype
experience,
has how many users on it?
And how often do we these days, again, since LCS 2003 and then the Edge in the 2005 and moving forward, how often are you finding presence exists for companies that you had no idea had presence, either because they're Office 365 and they've moved there and they just have Lync anyway, or they've gone through the effort or either OCS or they are a Lync version out there. It is not uncommon. It is really exhilarating to see how much of this is being pushed down and how much of the acceptance factor is coming from at least an IM perspective.
Yeah, most definitely. And there are a few websites out there that categorize and collect all the Open Federation companies that are out there.
Yeah.
It's actually
Microsoft's not one of them.
No, it's not. It's really heartening to see, though.
It is. It really is. It touches me.
We've walked through this before, but you, from an exam perspective, do at least have to understand that there is a process to federate with a PIC provider.
Yeah. It's not, you don't just work. You have to be set up and configured and have an EA or some site of Microsoft agreement in place of some sort.
Yeah.
Which you would have if you bought the product.
Some way to pay Microsoft.
Yes.
Yeah. When we talk about what is supported by those different federations, we start getting into, again, this mix of X's and checks and pluses to determine. I like that those first two columns are identical, right?
Any and everything.
Any and everything, if you've turned it all on, you can get yourself to where your own company's users and another company's users have full fidelity and full access between them. It's really nice to be able to just pick up and call Brian.
Great. No, but it is nice. And not only nice that a remote user, conceptually, if you again have the rights and policies and the firewalls and everything set up, whether I'm working at home or whether I'm working on the road and from a hotel or whether I'm at the office, I have the same Lync experience, phone experience, video experience. Everything is fully functional. So
yeah, it's really nice. And then when you get down into PIC and interop, you start seeing, oh wait, that PIC user can't be involved in an IM conference.
Yeah, majority of the conferencing is where we get lost.
Yep, most definitely. You'll note there's the Windows Live Messenger is not really true. That probably statement should be separated or left to Skype. The latest version of Skype client gets you the AV peer-to-peer, but again, we knock those X's at the file transfer and the AV conferencing. So Edge. Edge, I think in our last session, Edge was a session all of itself. And if you go and find the Tech Ed sessions, there's a really good presenter, a guy named Thomas Binder, who presents a very, very detailed, deep walkthrough of Edge and Edge capabilities that you can go and review from the Tech Ed links. I believe that'll probably be the best place to find it. But when talking about Edge services, it gets back into knowing the external scenarios you want to support and what are the firewall requirements to make that work, right? What are the network requirements to make that work? What are the filters that we need to have? You're talking about SPIM, right? Do you need to have file transfer filters or additional, if you're a company that deals with a specific proprietary file format that you want to make sure your users don't send to other people, maybe you put that file format in the blocked file list. Definitely need to understand the DNS usage in Lync server, what DNS makes, and it'll make or break a Lync deployment.
Right, 100%, especially when we're talking about, again, either split or non-split, or how DNS is presented externally versus internally. Is it one zone? Is it multi-zone? It can get to be a little complicated at times. It's not as bad as it used to be. People are understanding the idea that, hey, it's a good idea to have DNS outside different than DNS inside. I don't want you resolving my Active Directory domain controllers. I don't want you resolving all of my internal
higher ed that still exists.
It does. But even the higher ed is getting to the point where they get it. It's like, well, we get it. It's not that easy to fix, but we get it.
Yeah. And we'll talk about all these things in a little more detail in the rest of this presentation.
One thing that's not on that list that I think is highly important is the political aspect that's not on there. From an edge, there will always, if it's a real deployment, always be a political discussion on, do we need it, do we not need it, and what are we creating vulnerability-wise to us? Why am I doing this? A lot of companies will say, you know what, I don't need remote access, I'll just do VPN. I think it's part of your job to say, we can. We'll need to set up some split, and we'll have to get things to work correctly.
We wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah, and it's a bad idea in general.
Yep.
But
so when we're talking about that's a bad idea, let's talk a little, very quickly, about why that's a bad idea.
Because it is.
More than that, Brian.
Okay. Well, you said a little. That was a little.
Lync is designed to be secure on the wire, right? We do media encryption and protect those things on the wire as that media channel is going across that. If we then have to doubly encrypt that and packetize it in a VPN tunnel, we're introducing latency, not just to encrypt and decrypt it, but potentially we're now introducing problems because we've packetized it in a TCP packet when we prefer the UDP
for media
stream for that media. So there's a bunch of reasons to deploy in a split tunnel mode for your VPN or direct access users, right? But that means you have to have edge, right? Because you can't do split tunneling if you don't have a separate way to get the media in.
Yeah, and just so in general, VPN and Lync are bad. They don't play well together. They work, don't get us wrong. And IAM and presence will work just fine. It's once we get to the media side that things get very undesirable in performance and in the way things look and work. So,
so what you'll see on this firewall design requirements or firewall requirements for external scenarios, it really starts talking about what are the channels and what communications go out to the edge internal IP address, and then what starts to come back in to these 1, 2, 3 IP addresses on that edge server.
No, I thought we could use a single IP address on the edge server.
You can, it's not recommended.
Right.
The reason you can, so rather stepping back, that's the reason we need 3 is because we have 3 unique Windows services listening on that, and each of those services has to have an IP and port binding to be able to listen on.
Right.
So if we only have, and it has to be unique, you can't have multiple Windows services listening on the same port.
Right, because then it would be the whose data is it?
Right. So if you want to deploy on a single IP address out here, you're going to end up having port 1, port 2, and port 3. Where that starts to complicate things is how many companies are going to let you send data this way on a port that's not 443 or 80?
Right. I mean, even if your company does, and so you don't have an issue, take it one step further and say, I'm going to travel to a hotel. They're not going to let you go out anything but outbound from your box out to the internet, 443 and 80.
Yep.
Because they're blocking it by policy. So if I need to go to port 444, that'll be denied.
445 really denied.
Yeah, well, exactly. If I want to go to 5061, that's going to be denied. So the defaults are 5061, 444, and 443. 2 of the ports, 1 being the signaling, so you can't even get signed in. You're not going to work. So do yourself a favor, spend the extra time and money, and get the 3 IPs.
Yeah.
That's how the product is designed to work and work well, and allow you to get the biggest reach and the biggest impact for your users by being able to get in basically from anywhere.
Right. Get that IP1, IP2, IP3. And this thing's got an XMPP proxy service. The reason that's noted as different is because even though that is on the same IP as the Access Edge, it's a different port. Mm-hmm. XMPP just transits on a different port. We have to recognize that. That's why it'll have this 5269 opening rather than the 80 and 443 5061.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and it is important to know, if XMPP is not part of your feature and fund, you don't have to open the port. If you're not configured for it, don't open it. From a security perspective, we wouldn't want you to open it.
Right. If you haven't checked that box to enable XMPP Federation, there's no reason for you to open 5269.
Right. Well, you're not listening on the server anyway, so it's not going to go anywhere, so why open a hole in the firewall? So.
Yep. We have these additional sets of 80 and 443 traffic that are transiting and going to the reverse proxy, terminating and then going inbound on this 8080 and 4443. It's important to note that if you do allow traffic to enter on 80 and exit on 8080, when it hits the front end for that service, it'll in fact redirect it to 443.
And the real reason for this, if I go to your company, Contoso, and I go to dialin.contoso.com in my web browser,
I may not put HTTPS.
If by user basics, right, I'm not going to try HTTP and HTTP. I just put in the domain of where I want to go, and if the redirect doesn't happen, I get an error displaying the page or a timeout.
Yep.
So by having that, or by having a TMG server that's going to receive on 80 and do a redirect, that can work as well.
Have something out here that does that same redirect is perfectly acceptable.
That's right. We don't have to pass it into the server to do its own redirect. We can do it out
we don't have to do it at this 8080 layer.
Right.
It works if you want to do it there. If the proxy product you've got isn't smart enough to do that, it works.
Right.
So, again, this is a complex thing. There's a lot of moving parts to turn this on and to get this all working. It's important to understand this. And again, back to Brian's point of view, these are political discussions that the guy who runs this box, this internet box out here, may throw a hissy fit when you tell him you want a Windows server to sit right here.
The may is the funny part, because it's probably large organizations at least 50% of the time.
If they deployed OCS, you don't have to have that fight, because you had that fight 2 years ago.
Right. But the ports in general, knowing the ports is very important for the exam. Knowing what the functionality is.
Right. Knowing what happens over these ports. Knowing your end interaction. If 5061 isn't open, do things still work? What breaks?
A lot of stuff from a federation perspective.
Yeah, a lot of federation things break over that.
Right. The other thing to keep in mind from a, not necessarily an exam perspective, but from looking at this picture, this is the simple world without hardware load balancers involved with the edge. Once we get into that mix, things get quite complicated, and it's not going to be touched on the exam, so there's nothing to worry about there, but it is something to take in consideration, and it's very well documented on TechNet.
Yeah.
What needs to go where, when you come in, an internal HLB with a single NIC, with multiple NICs.
Right, if you've
public
got
IP requirements, all of that.
If you've got a second edge server here and you need to have a hardware load balancer here for some of your federation requirements, maybe you've got a high use business case for federation with a partner company that has a down level organization.
So there are no CS 2007 R2 or their XMPP.
Yep.
They have the custum Javas kind of stuff going on, and
but it's high business need.
Right.
It's $1 million a minute. Yeah.
Then you're gonna
you're gonna put in HLBs, and you're gonna start hardware load balancing some or all of this traffic.
Right. At least on the outside interfaces.
Yep.
Right. And then that means also the inside because it's an edge to edge. But not necessarily on the inside pools, and probably not.
Yep.
Unless you have old OCS clients in the mix and you're doing a migration and you need to support HA for that. I mean, there are, anyway, HLB. Okay.
We say we don't need it, but it's not really true.
Oh yeah, we need it.
So, your edge network requirements.
Yay.
These are important things to remember. NAT is not supported on that internal interface.
That's right. It has to be able to be a one-to-one communication.
So you can't NAT between your internal LAN and the IP address that's that edge internal IP.
Okay. Your clients will be talking directly to it. It'll be talking directly to stuff. It has to be the IP. Media won't flow otherwise.
Yep. Yep. Again, for your external interface, if you're doing a single edge server, you need a one-to-one NAT. If you're doing hardware load balancer, you need routable IPs.
A lot of them.
Lots of them. In this environment, if I had 3 edge servers here, I'm going to need 12 VIPs on my load balancer.
9, 12. Yeah, because you're going to give a public IP for all of your interfaces on every box, plus the public VIP IP
of the VIP itself.
Yeah.
Yep.
It really gets expensive, but it is an option. If that's what you need, again, this goes back directly to business requirements. If that is a requirement because of the business drivers, well, then there's not really a discussion point, and it's not even an argument. It's like, this is, if you want it to work, this is what you need.
Yep. So. We need those things to make it work.
And then DNS load balancing can be one-to-one or NAT as well. That's...
Yep.
Yeah. Some people have a preference and believe NAT is a security method. I would argue it's not, but I mean, whatever. If that's what you want to do and that's how you're configured, the bigger point is we don't have to be custom to make Lync fit into that DNB.
Sure, but as long as we remember that first one, which is you can't NAT on the internal interface.
Right. You cannot NAT on internal. It has to be and could we have a guess? There could have been something like we did on the external AV where we put the real IP in the public IP, but we don't. So it's not an option. It's not even a communication point. You can't NAT the internal interface.
No. So from a filter perspective,
identical to OCS, let alone 2010 and on.
Yeah. Nothing's really changed here. You've got file filters, and you can specify the types of files that you want to allow in or not. You can specify URL filtering, and you can specify a little bit of a message that goes out and customize the interaction. When somebody sends a prohibited URL or a prohibited message, you can try and give them a little more of a touchy-feely friendliness to their interaction, though you've still denied their communication.
Right, and you know what? Initially, I remember back in the days of the 2005, it was highly used, especially the URL. The thought was that this was going to be a way all kinds of spam was going to come in, and malware and viruses. It never, not saying that it couldn't, but it never really became something of an issue, and it became more of an annoyance. So they would either append or put a space in with the under dashes, and so things didn't work. They weren't hyperlinkable. It was just
you got to copy and paste,
or there was nothing there at all, and that was the worst of all. Now you didn't get anything, so people were putting spaces in themselves. I would say in general, look at your security requirements. Don't force security requirements to exist simply because you can.
Yeah.
If it's not a business requirement today in other applications, do you let URLs go through email? So you'll probably let URLs go through instant messaging.
Yep, because even if they download the thing that was sent to them via an IM, they're still having to parse that on their client antivirus. That's or client malware.
And if you don't trust your client, well, there's a lot of different issues you have at that point.
Yep.
But the point is, don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. Tools are in place to help you meet the business requirements if it is a business requirement, but don't create a business requirement because you can. Highly important in all of this.
So we're going to spend a little time talking about DNS, and there's another section where we talk about DNS a little more, and we talk about the internal records that are important here. What we're talking about here is about what features and functionalities of Lync depend on DNS to work. And again,
everything.
When Brian was talking about clients, you've got some capability to bootstrap and alleviate the needs for split-brain DNS in domain-joined workstations that can process GPO, right?
Yeah.
As soon as you want to support BYO, as soon as you want to support Lync Mobile, as soon as you want to support those other scenarios, as soon as you want to support Open Federation, you need to have these things up and running and working the way that Lync expects them.
Okay. It would be like trying to use email and not have DNS working.
Yep.
You could, in theory, have everybody that's going to email you manually enter into their host record who you are and where things are going. It's not going to happen. And you could potentially have this set up as a very secure communications, which I've seen some, again, security, and but they didn't want DNS published, and they had a closed Federation direct. Well, you know what? Well, I guess that does work. But you still have a DNS record, or you created a host record and maintaining it. I mean, there are ways around it to make it secure, but DNS in and of itself and being able to discover stuff doesn't add a new vector of lack of security for you by any means.
Yeah. So. Hiding on the internet isn't a method for securing on the internet.
All. If you want to be found, you'll be found. So
DNS or not.
Right.
On this next slide, we're talking about the different DNS records that are really required.
That's a lot of records.
What, 8?
Okay, it looks like a lot of records.
It does. I agree.
It's also interesting how many point back to the same thing in there that are A records.
Yeah. No, there's really just a couple of SRV records that end up pointing to A records in the background on specific ports. And then a lot of these things end up going to either the reverse proxy or they're names that are specific to one of those 3 ports and IP combinations that were on the outside interface of the edge.
Now, because we use A records and not C name records, is there a reason for that versus not?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with a redirect and the way the client interacts with those things. So, a quick one for you. What is there unique about the external DNS and the record that resolves to the IP of the AV edge in terms of certificates?
Question again? So what's different about the name? Like, do we care about it, and how does it work?
And does it have to be on the cert that's on that outside edge?
It does not have to be on the cert, but the way that we're using and creating our certificate and getting our token, we just have to have a certificate to create the token.
Yeah.
We don't care what's on it, what the name is. It really makes no difference. The external name matters. Don't get me wrong. We got to be able to reach that IP.
We have to be able to resolve it, but in fact, there's no actual sort of TLS that happens on that port.
No, exactly.
It's happened on the back end and uses that certificate to enable that communication.
Right. We're creating our token based off of the certificate that's assigned to it, whether or not the name's on it, we don't care.
Exactly. It's the one place in this Lync environment where
place
where Lync doesn't care what the name on that cert is.
It's ironic because it really is the only place that matters. You don't even need a name and don't pay for a SAN. So anyway.
Anyhow, and that bottom record, Lync Discover.
Ooh, an important new one.
a new one that really is out there to support the Windows Store app, and it's what will enable your Lync on your mobile phones.
So we use this new Lync Discover. It is almost identical conceptually as Auto Discover is for Exchange.
Sure.
One-to-one.
With a small difference, the Auto Discover record on Exchange will in fact pull down an XML file that gets parsed by the client. The Lync Discover record will actually go out, find the reverse proxy. The reverse proxy will proxy that communication to the front end, and the front end will actually reply with, here's your actual outside IP of the access edge that you really talk to.
Now, isn't that an amazing thing? So previous to 2013 in Lync Discover, when we were doing edge communication, I had the ingress always from a single point.
So if Brian isn't on this external edge server, if Brian isn't on this external edge server because of his pool, his Discover record won't send him there.
Sure.
Whereas previously, we could only have one version of this SIP TLS record that resolves to one of these entry points.
Right. You could have multiples, and then you could round robin and get lucky where you're hitting or not hitting because of DNS load balancing, theoretically. But the advantage of it now is when I get my Lync Discover back, by the time I get what my answer is, I know which edge server to ingress into. And so all my signaling and my media traverse a single point rather than being split potentially.
Most definitely.
It's more efficient.
It's a big improvement, and it's a very small, not stateful transaction that goes on between that reverse proxy and the front end. So it's simply an HTTP request and a receipt of what my edge server is. PKI and certificates. It's important, right? We just told you that there's only really one place in here where we don't care what that cert's name is.
But we do care there's a cert. Don't get us wrong. You have to have a cert.
We care that there's a cert.
There has to be, and a valid cert, and one that we can understand on both sides. Otherwise, So anyway.
So PKI, public key infrastructure, is really important to Lync from both an internal and an external perspective. How many of your clients these days, Brian, are deploying everything with publicly purchased certs?
The number's gone down. There have been ones that have done it. There are advantages. Everything works, which is their argument. The disadvantage is being cost.
It gets pricey when you've got 15 Lync servers that all have SAN attributes.
And then move beyond that. Then there's Exchange that you could potentially be using this for. There's internal websites you could potentially be using this for. And you could argue that you have a higher level of security if others can't reach you because you don't trust them. I mean, there's the pros and cons. My device can't get there because it doesn't trust it, then it doesn't work either.
Yeah.
But it's
in the chat talking about PKI, we had somebody who was asking about how do we install certificates on an Android device. The internet's full of answers for that. There's lots of ways to get certs on an Android device. Don't bother asking us for that because I don't think either Brian or I actually have one to.
I mean, I have my son's. He's my poor problem child that I have to work with to make sure that I get it to work, to know that it works. But the interesting thing will be, specifically in Android, Google or Bing, your specific model and your specific OS version and your specific
maybe your
version,
carrier. And
because the problem with Android is every revision and every change is completely different. I have people that complain all the time. I went to bed last night, I wake up, my phone looks different. It's because the way that the Android operating system works, just because you came out at the same time and you're on a carrier A, doesn't mean that they're all going to look the same. They're all different. It's up to each vendor to develop their interface and the way the operating system works and the version of the kernels and bits in the background that they're using. So, just have fun.
But you can definitely find an answer somewhere out there on Gabing.
It'll be there. There's ways to do it. Some are just emailing you the certs. Some are doing certain pool stuff. Some are blah blah blah. So
there's a bunch of different ways to handle that.
But it's important.
It is. It is. You've got to get that cert because in Lync 2013 we use certs for the TLS between the client and server, MTLS between the servers, all the federation stuff, all the remote user access, all the external access, all the mobile requests, and persistent chat for file upload download. Wait, you can still upload and download files in persistent chat?
We can if we use the old client. Anyway,
it's
we'll get to that in tomorrow's thing, but yeah. But it is interesting because any and all communication within the Lync world. Now, if we add in third-party things and gateways, perhaps not. Although we have the option to. Is secured, encrypted,
on the
signaling and media on the wire.
Yep, signaling
Everything
and media,
is encrypted.
TLS encrypted on the wire.
That's right.
It's a really nice place to be.
Yes.
So there's a really common ask, which is, what do my cert's subject and subject alternative names need to be in my Lync world? The simple answer is, let the topology builder and let the server install wizard put them in for you.
That's right. You know, if you go to the cert wizard and there's names there that you didn't expect to be there, you put something in your topology that you didn't either want there or typoed incorrectly somewhere. Because that's all the wizard is doing, is it's reading the topology and saying, in order to support X, you need this. So trust it. Don't second guess your topology.
If you look through and use that, it's going to spit you out what it thinks it needs to make the server run. Right.
Now, and keep in mind, in general, your certificate name is the pool name. If your pool is an SE, well, then that's your server name, because that, again, is your pool. And then your SAN will be everything other. Everything else. You're going to have anything that it could be referred to as, or all of your simple URLs. You're going to have your server name itself, so it can do MTLS. You're going to have Lync discovers, I guess considered somewhat.
You're going to have all those additional services that are listening out there, and all those names, and maybe even that fallback of that sip.domain name, just in case somebody finds you via that.
Which is a great, actually, it's a way to get there. I like SIP, especially if it's internal and there's no cost. Why not?
And we use SAN certs with subjects and SANs on front ends, on edge servers, and on directors.
Right.
So the big important thing to realize when you're planning about certs and cert providers is use one of the providers on the supported list on your outside. When you're deploying on the outside, use one of the ones on the supported list, because those are the ones that are going to work for your mobile phones and work for your
everything that you're going to touch. I mean,
your phone.
Don't hurt yourself.
Lync Phone Edition devices
has a limitation, right?
They have a limitation about what certs they understand and what certs they can be used with.
Right. They've got their cert storage just like anything else does, and if they don't trust the root, things aren't going to work. And there are a bunch out there, and there are ones that are known to generally work. There are ones that are known to cause a lot of PSS headaches, and there are ones that are very Lync friendly and Exchange friendly, and it's not hard to find. So
the UC certified certs.
Exactly. They just work.
So. If you end up deploying private or, in fact, public certs, you may need to think about and consider CRL download locations, so that's certificate revocation lists. If you're in a highly secure environment that prevents outbound web requests, you may need to open up your, at least Lync server's ability to download and access those CRL lists.
Yeah, and it gets back to, if you're using an internal PKI, planning accordingly. The App Store client has an issue. It by function and design needs to talk to the CRIL. So if you're on the outside and you can't reach that CRL of your internal CA because you've used internal certs, things are going to fail. And so making sure that, one, you've published in your certificate an HTTP location to get to it, and then two, that port's open, that could be something you need to consider, and all part of your design. And had you gone through the RASC process, you would have discovered that, because it didn't work, right? So
yeah, most definitely. So one last sort of usage scenario we've got here that it sort of touches on external, but more touches on PKIs and certs. It's that we've got SBAs use certs. And remember, we talked about that SBA was an embedded device, that's gateway provided. They will provide you some ability to get a TLS cert on that thing, and it really is that when that SBA tries to sign in, it gets that cert that's installed on it and uses that for client-level authentication. It looks at the SIP domain of the SIP URI and tries to use that against the installed cert that you've put on the box, and if it matches, it'll let you register. Right? It's a little tricky when you're deploying these SBAs, but it's about providing voice resilience.
Right. And most SBAs have a web interface that they've custom created in GUI to walk through the process. Just follow the process and work with the provider if things aren't working well, because that's who's created the custom code.
Most definitely. And unless there are some questions from the field, I think we are going to be done for the day.
Only that people like Bing Google better than the Google.
Okay.
All right.
Bing
Other
it
than
on.
that,
Remember the Bing it on challenge?
bring it on, yeah. No.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So I think then we're good for the afternoon.
Yeah.
We will resume our second session tomorrow.
Monitoring and archiving, I think, tomorrow morning.
And PChat.
Oh, yeah, persistent chat.
We want to get into the persistent chat fun. And we'll have another couple of demos tomorrow. Hopefully things go well then, too.
Yep.
But until that time, we appreciate everybody that attended today and look forward to your attendance tomorrow. Thanks so much.